This is Tiara speaking, and we are back from break. I will give everyone just a few moments to return to the call. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everyone. This is Tiara Yakini speaking. For those joining us for the first time, I am with the Disability Rights and Compliance Division at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, and I am happy to welcome you to the final session of MDCR's virtual celebration of the 34th anniversary of the ADA. So far today, our amazing speakers have reviewed the history of the ADA. They have provided us with facts about assistance animals, and they have highlighted the importance of digital accessibility. During this session, we are going to explore the impact of the ADA and the impact that it has had on citizens right here in Michigan. I am fortunate to have with me today 4 honorable guests to share their insights on this topic. Please join me in welcoming Sanho Steele-Lashar, attorney and legal program coordinator at the National Federation of the Blind; Keisha Graves, owner and founder of Girls Chronically Rock; and Assistant U.S. Attorneys Shannon Ackenhausen and Kaylin Pruss from the U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern and Western Districts of Michigan. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I'm going to jump right in and get our conversation started by asking, what did the Americans with Disabilities Act do for people with disabilities in the United States? And I am going to pose that question to Kaylin. If I can ask all of my panelists to please turn your cameras on for this session if you are able. If you are not, that is fine. Again, Kaylin, I will ask Shannon. I will ask, what did the Americans with Disabilities Act do for people with disabilities in the United States? Thank you.
Good morning, Tiara. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here on the panel. This is Shannon Ackenhausen from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Michigan. So in response to your question, Tiara, when passed in 1990, President George H.W. Bush described the ADA as being powerful in its simplicity. I think that's important to keep in mind when thinking about the legal framework of the ADA. The ADA is all about access. Simply put, ensuring individuals who have disabilities have equal access to employment, service, programs, activities of state and local governments, as well as private businesses operating in their communities. From a statutory perspective, the ADA is broken up into 5 sections, which are referred to as titles. And different titles set out the requirements for different kinds of organizations. So for example, Title I of the ADA covers requirements for employers, and Title II covers requirements for state and local governments. Title III covers private businesses that are open to the public. I think that terminology can be somewhat confusing because in Title III, those are referred to as places of public accommodation, but the language really means private businesses that serve the public, not public entities. In Title IV, there are requirements for telecommunication operators to provide services to callers with hearing and speech impairments. And Title V includes several important enforcement and administrative procedures, including a provision we deal with regularly, which makes it a discrete violation of the ADA to retaliate or discriminate against someone for attempting to exercise their rights under the ADA. The ADA protects any qualified individual with a disability from discriminatory treatment when that treatment is based upon a disability. And the ADA looks at this in a few different ways. So you are protected under the ADA if you have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities. If you have a record or a past history of having such an impairment, even if you don't have such an impairment, if you are being regarded as having that type of disability or impairment, you're protected. And finally, if you have an association with someone who has a disability, so typically this is a familial relationship, but it could be other types of relationships as well. And when you're working with the ADA, disability is a substantial limitation on one or more major life activities. And that's a pretty broad definition. So things like caring for oneself, learning, concentrating, thinking, communicating, operations of major bodily functions, those are all considered to be major life activities. When we're celebrating this robust history of the ADA, it's important to remember the significance of the ADA Amendments Act of 2008 in the legal history of the ADA. Congress passed the ADA Amendments Act in part to address case law that had too narrowly interpreted the ADA's definition of disability. And as members of Congress explained, the ADA Amendment Act rejected a high burden that was required and reiterated that it was Congress's intent that the scope of the Americans with Disabilities Act be both broad and inclusive. So one notable provision that we gained from that amendment was to make sure that disability is considered and that disability determination is made without consideration of what we would call ameliorative effects of mitigating measures. That is a pretty dense phrase, but what we're talking about is, for example, if you have a visual impairment that can be improved with eyewear, you look at the underlying impairment, not what is achieved with the correction to determine if somebody has a disability. Similarly, somebody with well-controlled HIV or an undetectable viral load, just because they are in a good medication management place, is still considered to be protected by the ADA because the underlying condition is considered to be a disability. I want to also mention from a legal perspective, when we do this type of enforcement work, violations of the ADA are considered to be discrimination. And that could just be outright bias. It could be very overt discrimination. But more often what we see, and I think what this folks joining the call today may be aware of, are assumptions, stereotypes, paternalistic choices, or failure to make necessary accommodations or modifications that lead to a violation.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Shannon, for that summary of the ADA. I do want to pose a question to you, Shannon, also Kaylin and Sanho, who we have here on the call as well. As attorneys who specialize in disability rights, I'm sure you have seen many cases where the ADA has led to positive outcomes for Michigan citizens. And I'd like for you to share some of these cases with us because I think it's helpful to see real life examples of how the law is being applied.
Sarno. May I jump in?
Sure. This is Tiara speaking. Sanho, you now have the floor.
Perfect. This is Sanho. Hello and good morning. The most recent one that I worked on was an effective communication case for a blind high schooler here in Michigan who had received some Braille training, and that was great that she was able to read, but she unfortunately was not in a position to use any technology of any kind. The school district had decided that because they had provided her Braille skills, they did not need to provide her any other meaningful access to the curriculum. So under the ADA and under IDEA, we were able to successfully negotiate and settle a case. So that way this student would be able to receive that effective communication under Title II of the ADA and under the IDEA, so that way she would have that meaningful access. Because otherwise, as probably we all know, you cannot really engage with a curriculum in an equitable manner. You cannot really access the programs, services, and activities of the state government without technology in 2024. And so thankfully, the ADA gave us a very, very strong foothold to be able to say that she, in fact, did have rights to the school material. And that was both inside of school and outside of school, based upon what what she needed to access. And now those services will go ahead and be provided. So that was my most recent success. That was a really uplifting case for us.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Sanho. Kaylin or Shannon, I don't know if you have any cases that you would like to highlight as well.
Sure, I can go next. This is Kaylin Press speaking. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney in the Western District of Michigan, and I'm jumping in because I have a couple of matters I wanted to share that really flow from the examples Sanho shared. First, this is in the Title II context. Also, a couple of years ago, the Free Press published a report regarding the use of restraint and seclusion in Michigan schools, and that report noted that the Montcalm Area Intermediate School District in the Western District used seclusion more than any other school district in Michigan. And at that point, we disclosed that we were investigating Montcalm, and that investigation is ongoing. So I actually can't share more details about it here, but I still wanted to highlight it because combating the improper use of restraint and seclusion in schools is a priority for the Department of Justice right now. I think it's a powerful example of the scope of the ADA and how we can use it to combat different kinds of discrimination and segregation of individuals with disabilities. So seclusion in this context is the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or area, and if used improperly, that violates Title II of the ADA. And improper seclusion denies students the opportunity to participate in and benefit from a school's education program. It can also implicate the ADA's integration mandate, which requires public entities like school districts to provide services in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of individuals with disabilities. And it is often used as a substitute for proper behavioral and classroom management. So, for example, in the other cases DOJ has fully resolved, we have found incidents where students with disabilities were secluded dozens of times, missing many hours of instruction. Sometimes students were even secluded while they were engaging in self-harm without intervention. And you can read more about the department's work in those cases and to combat seclusion and restraint more broadly on our website. I'll make sure to share that link. I also wanted to highlight our work in effective communication cases, particularly in the Title III context. So that involves businesses that are open to the public, as Shannon explained. Our offices in the Civil Rights Division receive many effective communication complaints every year, and businesses that are open to the public are required to communicate effectively with people who have communications disabilities. Specifically, they must ensure that communications with people with disabilities are as effective as communications with others, and they must do that by furnishing the appropriate auxiliary aids and do that without a cost. So just to cite one recent example, we received a complaint recently that the MSU Federal Credit Union was refusing calls from deaf members who were using a video relay service to communicate. That is, they were engaging an ASL interpreter to serve as an intermediary between the member and the customer service agent who is using a voice telephone. And we found that MSU Federal Credit Union did not have any policies or procedures in place for communicating with deaf or hard of hearing members and was in fact denying calls from its deaf members. So we reached a resolution in which MSU Federal Credit Union put new policies and procedures in place for ensuring effective communication and including training all of their employees on effective communication and how to use video relay services. Again, this is kind of a discrete example, but I think it's a good one, illustrative of a lot of the complaints we receive and our ability to ensure pretty rapid relief for a member of our community who wasn't able to access her own bank account, and to ensure that a fairly prominent financial institution in our district is complying with the ADA and putting better policies in place to ensure effective communication.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kaylin. Shannon, do you have a case that you would like to highlight as well?
Sure, yes, and I always love hearing about the work of our colleagues in the private bar and at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District, the great work that's going on. I wanted to share just a little bit about a Title I case that our office resolved last year. This being Title I, we're talking about an employment case. And the case was filed in U.S. District Court as United States versus Michigan Department of Treasury, Michigan Civil Service Commission, and the state of Michigan's Office of State Employer. So we did file this case, and it was settled right at the same time that it was filed. And so I'm going to talk about what relief we achieved through the settlement agreement and the underlying issue that created the lawsuit. So this case actually started with just one employee of the Michigan Department of Treasury who filed a charge with the EEOC. And the employee was complaining that she had a disability and her request for reasonable accommodation had been denied. So this employee was just looking for use of a private office space on the Treasury's campus for about 30 minutes a day to take care of a medical procedure. And what was found when the EEOC first investigated, that the issue came with the handling of the reasonable accommodation request. First it was approved, then it was denied, then it was taken away. And so that's what led to the employee filing the EEOC charge. So the EEOC investigated, then they found that there was cause to believe that discrimination had occurred. And the way that the law works in this area is that the EEOC tries to resolve charges, and if they can't, then they will refer it to the DOJ if it is a public employer. So in this case, the employee was working for the state of Michigan, the Department of Treasury. And when the case didn't resolve with the EEOC, they referred it to DOJ. That's how our office got involved. So we did a review of the case. We met with the employee. We interviewed a lot of staff members at the state of Michigan, not only at Treasury, but at the other agencies I mentioned. And we were concerned about what we saw. We thought there had been some violations of the ADA. And so, as mentioned, we ended up filing suit. Another thing to just kind of mention here for everyone to understand is, even though when DOJ takes enforcement action, it's really about what happened to one person or maybe a group of people. We don't act as private lawyers for individuals. So this case was filed as United States versus those 3 state agencies, not the name of that private person versus those 3 state agencies. And so, as I mentioned, we were able to work with the state of Michigan and the Attorney General's office to resolve this case. And what I think is so fantastic about this case is that the resolution benefited so many people, not just the one employee who originally complained. So we were able to address the situation. Unfortunately, by the time that this case resolved, that employee had passed away. But we were able to get $40,000 in damages for that employee's estate that passed on to her family. And we were able to kind of address certain specific issues within the Department of Treasury, but we also took the opportunity to review the state civil service rules, internal guidance from the Office of State Employer, and other policies and practices that affect state employees at over a dozen state agencies, and work with the AG's office and representatives of those other agencies to get revisions to many policies and practices, and ensure training for employees at many of those agencies, so that in the future, when employees come forward with reasonable accommodation requests, we're hopeful that their experiences will be much different from the employee who originally complained to the EEOC in this case.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit about the impact that the ADA has had right here in Michigan. I do want to ask, what are some of the issues in your work that are currently trending, and what is your respective organization doing to address these issues? And I will start with asking that question of Sanho.
Oh my goodness, there is so much that I could say. This is Sanho. So the first thing that comes to mind is Title III of the ADA and its lack of provisions for internet accessibility. For those who do not know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is silent on the issue of the internet. In 1990, no one could have really imagined how ubiquitous the internet would become. And particularly for blind people, and particularly for blind people who use what we call screen readers or synthesized speech that reads to you the computer screen using special key commands, access is absolutely vital and also extremely easy to mess up. And in Michigan, specifically, Michigan is one of 18 states where we don't have a right to the internet in a lot of situations. And so, for example, we have something called the nexus test. The way that the nexus test is interpreted in Michigan and in a lot of other states is that unless a place of public accommodation, meaning a business that is open to the public, unless it has a physical location, what we call a brick and mortar location, that makes its goods and services available to the public, well, it does not need a website or software or applications that are accessible to disabled people under the law. That's how that's been interpreted. And so we are fighting against that all the time because so many virtual companies these days, banks or online schools or private schools with online components, they might not have a physical location that's open to the public where they make their goods and services accessible. And yet, blind people, we believe, should have a right to access those services, even though those companies are virtual. So we are constantly fighting that battle. We're also fighting everything from voters' rights and prisoners' rights all the way up to parental rights, for instance, where we don't want the children of disabled people to be taken from them solely on the basis of their disability, because we all know that that is completely unacceptable under the law. So we fight those fights every single day at the National Federation of the Blind and are very, very happy to continue to partner with the Department of Justice. And that's for basically everything that we work on. We try and work with as many community partners as possible, whether that be local council or entities like the Department of Justice or an Office of Civil Rights. So that way we're all on the same team, moving toward equity on every level.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Sanho, for sharing about the work that you are doing at the National Federation of the Blind. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Keisha Graves to talk about the work that she is doing in her organization, Girls Chronically Rock.
Hi, everybody. I'm Keisha here. I currently do not live in Michigan. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am a Black woman. I live with muscular dystrophy, limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And yeah, a little bit about me and my organization, Girls Chronically Rock. I started in 2017 because I wanted to create something to help inspire and motivate others in the disability community. I always had a passion for fashion, but I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy in a later age, in my early 20s, when I was actually in graduate school. So I totally was in denial for quite some time. You couldn't tell me I had muscular dystrophy. So to see where I'm at now, it totally came a long way. But under the Girls Chronically Rock umbrella and just under Keisha Graves' umbrella is that I'm a huge disability advocate. I now am able to serve on the board for Persons for People with Disabilities of Cambridge, the city that I was born and raised, and also just like advocating right now for disabled housing. I feel like right now that is lack of. I've been speaking to my mayor of Cambridge about. I've been speaking to the city manager of Cambridge because I feel like it's very important. And I don't just want like new buildings going up where they have like 1 or 2 units for someone like myself in a wheelchair. No, I want it like all units wheelchair accessible, because I feel like that again is a problem that I am trying to address. And in this disabled housing, I want there to be a nurse on site, mental health therapist, physical therapist, because I feel like that is so important. I am someone that unfortunately had to go into a nursing home about a couple years ago prior to pandemic, and that is the worst. So someone for like myself, with a disability, it's like, it's a lot, you know, especially being a young adult. So I feel like disabled housing is so important, especially right here in my city of Cambridge. Like all these new buildings are going up. It's like, come on, let's go. So I'm not gonna stop until I continue to get the attention of my mayor of Cambridge, the governor, Marla Healy here of Massachusetts, because I think that's something that we really, really need. And then alongside that, along with disabled housing, also lack of personal care programs, AKA PCA, where someone like myself has to rely on caregivers every day. I'm unable to walk. I can't stand up or transfer due to the fall I had a couple years back that led me into the nursing home. You know, PCAs, sometimes you don't know if they're gonna show up, if they are gonna show up, and it sucks. Cause it's like I can't, like, you know, if the PCAs don't show up, I can't show up. And so that's what I think a lot of people don't really understand. It's like people like myself that's relying on caregivers, like if they're like, oh, I can't come in today, I have a cold, or, you know, and everything could happen. I know, like, you know, life happens. It's like then I'm pretty much just in bed all day, no food, no water, I can't take my medications. So it's like things like that where I feel like there needs to be an implement program of, you know, whether it be in the state or just the city of, all right, well, this agency or this PCA can't come in. Let's you know, hire someone else. And I think the problem with that is, well, I know out here in Massachusetts, I can't speak for Michigan, but I feel like we would get a lot more PCAs, personal care attendants, if the pay wage went up. And that's something right now is 19 an hour out here in Massachusetts. And that's something, again, I continue to fight for with other advocates out here. We went down to the State House, Governor Healy, because I'm like, without them, you know, we pretty much lose our independence. So I think if the pay wage goes up, then a lot of our lives will be just so much happier. But, you know, I'm not going to stop. I'm advocating for disabled housing, PCA programming, and a lot more. And of course, adaptive fashion, because, you know, that's a passion of mine. And adaptive fashion for someone like myself comes a long way, because it takes us a lot to get dressed on a daily basis. And that's even with caregiver help. So just to have something adaptive, meaning like accessible, where it's like has magnetic snaps going down the shirt in the back, having a zipper closure on the left or side of the t-shirt, on the pants, I mean, makes a huge difference for someone like myself. So I'm glad that's getting more awareness as well. But yeah, all of the above. I'm just going to continue to advocate and make the world a more inclusive, better place for people like myself and the disability community.
This is Tara speaking. Keisha, you really gave us a lot of policy issues to consider, but I thank you for sharing and for being an example of advocacy in action. So thank you again. But I will pose the same question to Kaylin. What are some of the issues that you are currently seeing at the DOJ, and what is the DOJ doing to address these issues?
Yeah, so I used my last answer to mention one, which was restraint and seclusion in schools. Another priority for DOJ right now is using the ADA to protect people with opioid use disorder, or OUD. The opioid pandemic continues to pose extraordinary challenges to communities across our state, and ensuring that people can continue to access treatment and recovery services is crucial to combating that pandemic, and doing so before it reaches, you know, our criminal colleagues and the other parts of their U.S. attorney's offices. So people with opioid use disorder typically have a disability because they have a drug addiction that substantially limits one or more of their major life activities. Drug addiction is considered to be a physical or mental impairment under the ADA. And our colleagues across the Department of Justice have used the ADA to secure important agreements to protect people with OUD from discrimination. A couple of examples, the Justice Department recently announced a settlement agreement with the judicial system of Pennsylvania, which was preventing individuals under court supervision, so people who were on probation or parole or other forms of release, from lawfully taking prescribed medication to treat their opioid use disorder. So in short, individuals were having, in the criminal justice system, were having to decide whether to take their prescribed OUD medication and thus potentially face jail time for violating the terms of their probation or parole, or stop taking their medication in order to comply with those terms, but then, you know, face withdrawal symptoms or possibly relapse into addiction. Similarly, the Justice Department has reached numerous settlements with correctional facilities to ensure that people with opioid use disorder can receive opioid use disorder treatment while they are incarcerated. Again, this prevents people from having to decide to undergo a hard withdrawal simply because they enter custody. And it also is providing individuals the opportunity to begin OUD treatment while they are incarcerated. The Civil Rights Division recently announced guidance on these protections, which I can share the link for. But I just want to make a plug. If you hear of people in the community experiencing discrimination because they have opioid use disorder, not just in the criminal context I mentioned with people in the criminal justice system, but also in employment or licensing or access to healthcare or other services, please do reach out to our offices because we'd be eager to talk to you about that.
This is Tara speaking. Thank you, Kaylin. I would open the floor to Shannon. I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add. If not, I can continue with our next question.
I think the answer has been well covered. It's great hearing about all the issues that are being considered by both the DOJ and the private bar. I'll also just quickly highlight that department has a long-standing initiative under the ADA to prevent barriers in access to healthcare. So it's called the Barrier-Free Healthcare Initiative. And through that initiative, we typically, well, I won't say typically, we address a wide variety of issues that can include effective communication. For example, for the deaf and hard of hearing community, it includes HIV discrimination, which unfortunately we still deal with quite a bit in the healthcare context, as well as really any barrier that is affecting someone with a disability from accessing the critical services of healthcare. But I think with that, I'll close out.
This is Tara speaking. Thank you, Shannon. My next question is for Sanho. Sanho, you have a unique perspective in that not only are you an attorney, but you are also a person with a disability. Can you speak to us about the current limitations of the ADA and the work that still needs to be done?
This is Sunho. Absolutely, and thank you. I mentioned in my last answer that Title III of the ADA does not protect a disabled person's right to the internet or software or the digital landscape generally in about 18 states. And that is a bigger problem than the vast majority of people realize, because taking, I don't know, let's say the bank example that was mentioned earlier for a different disability category. If a blind person is trying to access their bank statement online, or they're trying to do mobile banking and they can't, but they also have a bill to pay and a deadline, what are they supposed to do if that virtual bank that does not have physical locations is allowed to do that? And so then we have to look for other states, other plaintiffs to be able to bring a case who hopefully they have standing in that area. It can be a very, very difficult situation in 2024 when you need access to any number of websites, phone applications, and they're just not accessible. And maybe they don't even have to be accessible, because sorry, if you lived in one state, you would have a right to this, but because you live in this other state, you just don't, because the federal judges there disagree with you. That is a huge barrier, one of our largest barriers. But then there are also things like, I'll pick on rideshare for a moment. What do you do as a disabled person with a service animal and you have to get to work, or you have to get to an absolutely essential function, and you order Uber or Lyft and they just deny you 6 times in a row because you have a service dog, or maybe because you have a cane and they don't know how you're going to fit your cane into their vehicle, or they don't know how to communicate with you effectively because whatever their reason might be. And so they just cancel the ride, or they argue with you, or maybe they even injure you. That has happened more times than I can count throughout the country, unfortunately. So I'm very troubled by the limitations on the law right now. Things do seem to be moving mostly in the right direction. We are continuing to get wins. We're continuing to partner with our community partners to pursue these cases, even the ones where sometimes they're not a slam dunk. They're not an easy win because the law is blurry or because judges disagree with us about what our rights are. Same thing, I think the final thing I'll talk about here would be the employment space. We hear that statistically, disability employment cases are the hardest cases in the United States to win because federal judges and juries often disagree with us about what it is that our rights are or what it is that we needed. And sometimes we even hear after a jury verdict comes down, well, yeah, they discriminated or they might have discriminated, but there were these other reasons why they might have terminated the disabled person as well. And we just can't continue to live in a world where that's acceptable. And so we fight those fights, even though they're not very likely to win. That's a risk that we have to continue to take because if you don't try, then you never win. And so I think those are the big three would be, inaccessibility generally when it comes to the digital landscape, the ubiquity of people discriminating against us when we're just trying to access the physical world. And then separately, once someone is discriminated against us, what are the enforceability options and how likely are they to be enforced? We continue to fight all those fights and we're very happy to do so.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Sanho. Keisha, would you like to add to that regarding the limitations of the ADA and the work that still needs to be done?
Hi, yes, Keisha speaking. Thank you. I totally agree with everything Sanho said, especially when he mentioned the ride share. Again, up here in Massachusetts, I'm assuming it's the same thing. We call it the ride. It's so annoying. I honestly haven't used them in a while just because of the simple reason of one day they left me stranded when I went for physical therapy out here in Boston at Spalding, and I'm just was so annoyed. Another thing I love that Sanho mentioned was so for us in the disability community, I myself in a wheelchair, when going out, I would request an accessible Lyft or Uber, the wheelchair one. But with those, it sucks. It's still, I'm glad that yes, Lyft and Uber are doing this program, but I feel like it still kind of sucks just because of we can't say request our wheelchair van or Uber in advance if I know I have a doctor's appointment on Friday. It's kind of when I'm ready and dressed and me and my PCA are ready to go, I request it, and then it's pretty much the wheelchair van can be 15 minutes away. It could be 30 minutes away. It could be sometimes even an hour away. And then sometimes it could be 3 minutes. So those kind of things are very unpredictable, where I feel that needs to get worked on, because I'm yes, us in the disability community, we have doctor's appointments, but I'm don't forget, yes, we still like to go out and have fun too. Yes, we still like to date and do these things. So we just why is it so hard just to have those accommodations? Why can't I book the wheelchair van in advance? Why is the ride so lacking, so slow? Why are they not paying the people they deserve? Another thing I want to comment on was airplane. I used to love to travel. My family's from Barbados. Haven't been there in so long just because of now being in my wheelchair. I'm scared of what the airlines are going to do with my wheelchair. I hear such horror stories just from people I follow, on Instagram and TikTok. And it's how they just toss our wheelchairs like that is crazy. So I'm just afraid I may go somewhere, say to a tropical island or just to New York City, to Chicago. And I'm just so nervous. Because I'm they don't seem to understand if they ruin our wheelchairs and our wheelchairs are all messed up. For someone like myself specifically, I'm pretty much you're taking away my legs, because my wheelchair are my legs. So if you ruin my wheelchair can't power on because I use a power one. It's then what? Then my vacation or my destination, wherever I'm going, is ruined. And that terrifies me. So I just feel why are we still in 2024 and the airlines still haven't gotten together. I should be able to get on the plane ride without no worries in the world and be able to buckle in, just like how I can with a wheelchair van up here, just like you can on the MBTA, the bus, in those certain places. Why hasn't the airline got that together yet? So I'm just hoping one day it can, so I can go back to my traveling. And yes, I know I can take the chance and still travel and risk my wheelchair, but it's scary. Because like I said, if they ruin my wheelchair, they pretty much ruin my legs. And then what fun will that be for me? So there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. But those two, what Sanho mentioned, with the ride and then also the airlines, like something has to get better.
So it looks like there may have been a connection issue for, Tira, are you there?
Yes, I am. I apologize. Somehow I was disconnected, so my apologies. I'm not sure where we left off. I know Keisha was answering the question about the limitations of the ADA and the work that still needs to be done. So thank you for sharing, Keisha, even though I did not hear all of your response. The next question that I'll quickly pose to the panel is, noting that there are barriers still, and that discrimination is still an issue, where are some places that people can go for help and assistance?
Oh,
And
this
I'll start
is
with, oh, okay, go ahead, Sanho.
this is Sonho. I'll just jump in to say, first, you of course always have some of your nonprofit options like the National Federation of the Blind, which is a national legal program. We operate in Michigan as well as the other 49 states and Puerto Rico and DC. But and I'm sure the DOJ will talk about their options in a second. I just wanted to touch quickly. Keisha mentioned airlines. So, under the Air Carrier Access Act, if anything ever happens with an airline or an airport, you are certainly welcome to file a complaint with the Department of Transportation, and they can go ahead and take a look into that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanho. Shannon and Kaylin, would you like to share any resources?
Yep, absolutely. So as Sanho rightly pointed out, Department of Transportation would be the federal agency with jurisdiction over airlines. DOJ has pretty broad jurisdiction through the ADA over many other types of entities. So filing a complaint with DOJ is one way that somebody can seek to address an issue that they're facing. So as probably most of the public is familiar, DOJ is based in Washington, and that's where the Civil Rights Division is based. Within the Civil Rights Division, there is a disability rights section. So a group of attorneys that specifically focuses on ADA enforcement. So you can certainly file a complaint with the Civil Rights Division. They've got a website, they've got a phone number. They've even still got paper forms that you can submit to get complaints over to them. Fortunately, here in Michigan, you also have two local options to connect with the DOJ through my office and Kaylin's office. And I'll give you information about how to connect with my office. So in the Eastern District of Michigan, we're based in Detroit. We also have satellite offices in Flint, Bay City, and we have a small unmanned office in Ann Arbor. Anywhere the courthouses are, we have a little bit of a presence. We have in our civil rights unit a dedicated complaint line. So you can call 313-226-9151. That's 313-226-9151 to reach our civil rights complaint line, or send an email to usamie.civilrights@usdoj.gov. We'll give all that information over to you, Tiara, so that can be distributed for anyone who wasn't writing extremely quickly as I was speaking, to make sure that everyone knows how to file a complaint. I will say that unfortunately, in many cases, just due to resources, we cannot investigate every complaint that we receive, but we really do want to hear from you. So I encourage you to either reach out to your local U.S. Attorney's Office or Maine Justice to let us know what's happening in our communities. And Kaylin, would you like to provide information for your office as well?
Yes, we also have a civil rights hotline. So this is covering any matter that happens in the lower half of the lower peninsula, or the western half of the lower peninsula or the upper peninsula. Although if you reach out to either one of our offices, we'll get it to the right place. Our hotline number is 616-808-2195. Again, 616-808-2195. And our email address is the same, but one letter from the Eastern District's email. It's USAMIW.civilrights@usdoj.gov. And we'll share the information with Tiara to get it around.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you all so much. I will also note that, as my colleagues mentioned earlier, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights is also a resource as our enforcement division investigates complaints of unlawful discrimination on the basis of disability pertaining to the state law. So those who believe they have experienced discrimination are always welcome to contact our office as well. We are at the end of our time for today, unfortunately, but I would like to thank all of our panelists for being here with us and sharing the information that you have shared. It is always great to hear not only from those enforcing the law, but also those who are impacted by it. As we close, on behalf of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, thank you all again. Thank you to our audience for spending this time with us today. It is our hope that as you reflect on the significance of the ADA, you also walk away with resources that help you continue the fight for disability rights. For those interested in learning more about the work of the Disability Rights and Compliance Division, please visit the Michigan Department of Civil Rights website at www.michigan.gov/MDCR. We hope to see you all again soon. Bye for now. Please be on the lookout for an email that contains all of the resources shared today, answers to your questions, and the PowerPoint presentation that was used. Again, thank you for joining us.